The 2024 F1 season is set to have 24 rounds in 21 different countries, along with 6 being accompanied by 1/3 distance sprint races, giving us a total of 30 races at 24 different venues for the year, with each of those venues providing something different and something to look forward to. Except Abu Dhabi, that track sends me to sleep faster than a knockout blow from Mike Tyson. But luckily there's more to the F1 calendar than Abu Dhabi, so let's take a look at that then as we dive into my track rankings for the 2024 F1 season. First off, Bahrain, which after 2023 should be renamed to the add another 5-second penalty for Esteban Ocon International Circuit. But while Esty Bestie may not be the biggest fan, mind you, I don't think Charles Leclerc is either, but for the rest of us it's pretty good. With lots of overtaking and lots of battles such as turn 1, then turn 10 if you're Fernando Alonso, or the outside of turn 4 if you're Max Verstappen. And so with all that action, Bahrain is getting an 8. Next up, Saudi Arabia, the track with more twists and turns than a good crime thriller. Back in 2021, the track was built up from scratch, and then labelled a street circuit.
It's just like wrong. It's just wrong.
And while people, myself included, have had doubts over the venue's safety, backed up by crashes like this, and this, it does generally deliver exciting racing, even with the drivers having their games of DRS chicken. Plus you can't deny it's a pretty fun track to drive, so for a decent track with some solid racing so far, it's getting a 7. Now to Australia, with modifications been made for 2022 onwards, and so far they've worked. The run into and then through turns 9 and 10 is awesome, and so in general it's now a decent track. But that's it. For me, it still lacks a little something, and so for Australia it's a 6. Still not bad though. Next on our list is a new early spot on the calendar for Japan. First off, an absolute fan favourite. If I were to summarise briefly, it would be as follows. Track, awesome. Fans, awesome. Racing, kinda meh. I'm just kidding, it's awesome too. You have the Sector 1S's up there as one of the best sections on the calendar, plus throughout the lap there are multiple spots for overtakes, but like good ones. And by that I mean there's the chance for the move, but it's not a super easy DRS pass, say like the Bahrain main straight. And so ultimately, Suzuka is a track that just has the ingredients to be a top venue on the calendar, meaning that Japan gets the first 9 in these rankings. Round 5 and we're staying in Asia, heading west to China, back to the Shanghai International Circuit, having missed races in 2021, 22 and 23, because of that which shall not be named. But onto the track itself, and one where the design brief was make it bigger, much bigger. Need a great big whopping straight, so long that it makes the Avatar film seem short? Check. How about the longest turn it's physically possible to build without just making the track one big circle? Check. And then don't forget the banking as well. However, even with all these fancy elements, the racing in China has always been a little bit flat. Almost like they'd spent all this money on something and invested lots of time and effort, and it's still just not overly paying off. Definitely still talking about the Shanghai track here. Now hopefully in 2024 the new generation cars will really do China justice, but until then it's only getting a 5. Heading stateside now, and for the first time to the Miami International Car Park, because you know, it's built in a stadium car park. But it's still a venue that's provided one of my favourite F1 clips of all time. Jackie Stewart becoming Martin Brundle's personal celebrity grabber, and then also Craig Slater doing the backstroke on the cardboard marina in 2022. However, what you may have noticed is that neither of those are to do with the racing, and that's because so far when it comes to that department, well, it's been average at best. There's definitely potential there, despite having a candidate for the worst corner on the calendar.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
However, it's not been awful, and so for Miami it gets a slightly below average 4.5. Round 7 and it's off to Europe from the Gran Premio del May. Forget it. I'll just let you read it off the screen. The track that's more commonly just known as Imola. An old school track which is super fun to drive and provides racing which is somewhere near the average range.
Well, that's not great, but it's not horrifying.
Plus you throw in the occasional wet weather and changeable conditions, admittedly a bit too much in 2023, but still a generally solid track in my eyes anyway. And so for me, Imola gets a 6.5. Oh boy, it's Monaco.
Sometimes maybe shit. Sometimes maybe shit.
Well, at least that's usually the case, as unless we get a little dance from the rain gods a la 2023, the race is just rush hour traffic but with F1 cars. Honestly, I'll put my hands up here. On Friday, I get excited. Then on Saturday, I get really excited. Then on Sunday, it takes all of 3 laps for me to realise what I'm in for during the next 2 hours. The pluses I will give Monaco though are the history and how much qualifying matters, plus waiting to see who's going to strategically crash out to try and get pole position, not naming names. But overall, it is pretty poor, and I'm past kidding myself it'll be anything different, so Monaco's getting only a 3. Oh Canada, home of the completely useless F1 driver and home of some completely useless hockey teams. Thankfully, at least one thing that Canada has gotten right is the Canadian Grand Prix and the circuit Gilles Villeneuve, as although small in length, it still provides the action. With some decent overtaking spots and a wall that's literally known for taking out world champions, you've got yourself a good track. All Canada needs now is to get themselves a good driver. Actually, scrap that. Even an average one would be better than recent attempts. But for a rating though, Canada's one of the tracks that I really enjoy, and so gets a 7.5. Ugh, do I have to do this one? Well, for round 10, it's the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya and the Spanish Grand Prix, where action is suspended, excitement is banned, and a good race is prohibited. I mean, yes, we do get the occasional good race, and sometimes we have a top car fighting their way through the field, usually Sergio Perez, but on the whole, it just never gives us too much. And that's even with the awful chicane now being removed. So for Spain, I won't bore you too much longer, it's getting a 2. On to Austria then, and the shortest track on the calendar. In fact, if the Red Bull Ring was a dog, just bear with me, I know where I'm going with this, but it would be a Chihuahua. Small, doesn't back down, and will bite your head off if you give it the chance, with seemingly every turn giving drivers track limit issues, and someone being forced off into the gravel seemingly every single year. There's so much that goes on at the little 10-turn track, plus it usually gives a pretty good race, with overtaking spots at turn 3, and then at turn 4, continuing all the way down through turns 5, 6, 7 and 8, and that 8 is exactly what Austria is getting. Round 12 now, and it's time for the Brexit means Brexit Grand Prix, aka the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, a track that's absolutely caked in history, having hosted races back in the 1950s, a time so long ago that drivers weren't celebrating the win, but just the fact they made it to the end of the race. But for the track, it's one of those that really has everything you need, all the ingredients for a good weekend. Slow turns, fast turns, overtaking chances, and most importantly, the opportunity for some really good wheel-to-wheel racing. That is when you're not sending your opponent into the Shadow Realm. On a personal level as well, last year was the first F1 race that I'd ever been to. And even though the race wasn't the best we've ever had, still being there was a really amazing experience. So with all that said, for Silverstone and the British Grand Prix, it gets an 8.5. Moving on, and this time to Hungary, just outside of Budapest, and the Hungaroring, a track that often gets a lot of stick for doing its best to impersonate Monaco. But personally, I don't see the resemblance. Hungary often gives us some nice strategy questions, along with some weather queries too, and it is possible to overtake and race there. It's also possible, as Valtteri Bottas showed us, to take out half the grid before even getting to turn 2. Overall, I'd say it's a fun track to race on as well, though I would recommend doing that with other drivers. Lewis Hamilton, take note. And so for me, I do quite like Hungary, not enough to blindly see past its problems, but enough to give it a 6.5. On to the final round before the summer break, and it's the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps. Where the weather is more indecisive than me trying to pick out my Deliveroo order, the track itself is a fun one to drive with a fast Sector 1, a twisty Sector 2, and then back to a fast Sector 3. Corners like Eau Rouge and Radion are some of the most famous in the world, and the fact that it's one of the oldest races on the calendar only adds to the venue's prestige. However, it ain't all sunshine and rainbows, as the past few years haven't been the best, with race day often just lacking that little bit of sustained drama. Sure, there are battles, but for me, I just feel like the action is never overly sustained. And so while great, Spa loses its top spot from when I last did these rankings and gets an 8. So summer break over, and it's time for Max Verstappen's kingdom, the land of orange smoke, crazy weather, and one incredible racetrack. Corners like turn 3 that everybody loves, well, maybe everybody except Daniel Ricciardo. I can't stress how great this track is. It flows like Jason Momoa's hair and provides a challenge for the drivers at the same time. There are always concerns that it can be a little tricky to overtake, but so far every race we've seen hasn't really had that problem. Zandvoort is honestly becoming one of my favourites, and this time out gets an 8.5. Now we return from the summer break and head to a place where the racing is part of history, where speed is sacred, and where you'll get thrown in jail for putting pineapples on pizza. I am of course talking about Monza, Italy. It's called the Temple of Speed for a reason, and that's because it's quick, the fastest average speed on the calendar. The racing, however,
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
With DRS trains, often the order of play comes Sunday, with limited strategy and limited action, unless you're Ferrari, watching your drivers almost take each other out. I always find Monza just leaves me with a little bit to be desired. So with that, Monza gets a 6.5. Still good, just not great. The final European race on the calendar, and it's Baku. With long straights, castles, and the annual despair for Ferrari, this one is pretty decent. For a street track, it usually provides some good action, as well as the opportunity for drama. Throw in some safety cars, usually courtesy of Nick de Vries and friends, and you have yourself an exciting Sunday. Not top tier, but pretty close behind. So for Baku, it's going to be a 7. Heading east again, and for round 17, it's Singapore, a track that's famous for the most scandalous moment in F1 history, until Nicholas Latifi got a seat in F1. Now in the past, the race was a procession and only saved by the nighttime setting. However, since the new cars in 2022 and the removal of a few corners to create a new straight, the action is better, with 2023 giving us one of the season's craziest moments, a last lap showdown with 4 cars fighting for the win, and then George Russell deciding to just go off doing some side quests. And so I definitely do think Singapore has improved. Not into the elite category by any means, but enough for it to get a 6.5 in these rankings. Time for USA Part 2 now at the Circuit of the Americas, an absolute roller coaster of a track in Texas that very rarely fails to deliver something good, whether it's wheel-to-wheel racing, strategy drama, or Mercedes just running the car too low and getting themselves disqualified. There's always something, add into that some sprint races too, and you've got yourself even more action. Enough to give COTA and the US Grand Prix an 8.5. Just 5 rounds to go and we're off to Mexico, a place with good food, great culture, and god-awful racing. Don't get me wrong, the Mexico atmosphere is amazing and full of cool stuff. I mean, where else do you get this kind of madness for a podium? The run into turn 1 is always good, given it's almost as long as Fernando Alonso's career, with more often than not it being 3 wide on lap 1. Isn't that right, Checo? But after that, really not much. The altitude means there's all sorts of overheating issues, it's hard for the cars to follow each other, and the track doesn't overly lend itself to helping that out. So for Mexico, it's not the worst, but it only gets a 4. Down to South America now, and one of the best, Brazil. Interlagos in Sao Paulo is really a venue that has it all. It's an old school historic track that gives us a lot: wheel-to-wheel action, lengthy battles, strategy options, drag races up to the finish, and don't forget the changeable weather conditions too. Brazil is a race that I know I look forward to, and a lot of other people do as well, understandably so. There's really nothing I can complain about here, so Interlagos Brazil gets a 9.5. On to Las Vegas now to complete the United States F1 trilogy and to the new centerpiece of the F1 calendar at the loose drain cover circuit. Okay, issues like that aside, which should just be a one-off, everything about Vegas is to the max. Now yes, some people will always be skeptical of new tracks, and to be honest, F1 dropping the upside down pig circuit didn't help, but having now had a weekend there, it showed it can deliver. Yes, there are some issues. The temperature for one and the timings are another, but even with that, the whole event is fun, regardless if Karen Verstappen thinks otherwise. However, for me at least, I'm loving Vegas so far, and so it's getting an 8.5. Almost there now, and it's the second to last race in Qatar, which out of all the races on the calendar, is the one I'm most uncertain on. For most of the track, there's not too much opportunity for battles, however at turn 1 there is the opportunity to make an overtake, or just drive into your teammate if you're Lewis Hamilton. Plus all the issues that have been had with the absolute pyramids for curbs, and I don't know, it just doesn't quite click with me. So for now at least, Qatar gets a 4.5. And finally onto Abu Dhabi and the what's the point of being here Grand Prix. Yas Marina has never been good, and although the changes have made it slightly better, it still just generally doesn't deliver much. And now with Las Vegas coming onto the scene, it can't even claim the title for F1's most glamorous, flashiest or wealthiest race anymore. And so while not the very worst in my opinion, Abu Dhabi and Yas Marina only get to 3. So there you have my 2024 F1 track rankings. Let me know your thoughts on where you agree or disagree down in the comments below, and until next time, take care.